Hi, welcome to the Lone Star Dowsers October 2022 program. You are in for a treat tonight because we are going to talk about lucid dreaming and creating a positive reality. As you know, we're in really challenging times, and we have a lot of opportunities, especially as dowsers, to remember our true nature and connect with our fundamental inspiration and our core purpose. And it's an excellent time to dream our most desirable possibilities into reality, into a lucid waking dream. And I'm delighted to introduce Cynthia Sue Larson, quantum physicist, and I'm going to just say magical being, but she has a lot of letters behind her name. So I'll go ahead and give you a little more background for those of you who may not be familiar with Cynthia Sue. She's a best-selling author of several books, including Quantum Jumps, Reality Shifts, High Energy Money. Now, Cynthia also has a degree in physics from UC Berkeley. She has an MBA degree. She's a Doctor of Divinity, and she's a second-degree black belt in Kuk Sul Wan. She's the founder of RealityShifters. She's the first president of the International Mandela Effect Conference, and she's the managing director of Foundations of Mind and creator host of the Living Quantum Dream podcast. She's been on lots of shows, including Gaia, the History Channel, Coast to Coast AM, One World with Deepak Chopra, and BBC. And Cynthia's favorite question that she wants us to always remember to ask is, how good can it get? So welcome, Cynthia, and how much fun and how good can it get tonight?
Oh, thank you, Mary. Such a pleasure to be with you all, and so happy to be talking about this topic. So I think you did such a fabulous job introducing me. I'll just dive in if that's okay.
Yes, dive in. And I'm going to tell all our wonderful audience to, if you have questions, put them in the chat, and I will, I'll be our moderator. But she's going to keep going unless we have questions.
Yeah. And if you want Mary to ask it, just give it a nudge. Say, please ask this question.
Yeah, and I'll be watching the chat.
Okay, good. And I'm going to go ahead and share my screen because I've got I'm just making sure I've got the right screen here. Hopefully so. Okay, this will be.
Because we love visual aids, so we have a PowerPoint.
Yes, hopefully you can see that. This is the topic, lucid dream, creating a positive reality. And it's in these interesting times, really. Challenging times. I think that was a Chinese sort of a curse of sorts. May you live in interesting times. And we definitely are living in interesting times. Okay, let's see if I can figure out how to try to hit next slide and
hit your arrow button and see if that'll.
I tried that. Oh, there we go. Just got stuck. Yes. So you've already introduced me. I don't need to read this again. My website is Reality.
Do you want to tell people what the Mandela effect is in case they don't know?
Oh, sure. Yeah. The Mandela effect. It's a recent term for an old phenomenon. I was actually writing about it in my book, Reality Shifts. When Larry Hagman died, and then I noticed he was alive again. But we don't call it the Hagman effect when someone's dead and alive again. Somehow the Mandela effect got picked up because of Nelson Mandela having been noticed by a lot of people, myself included, that we remembered he had died while incarcerated. He was in prison on Robbins Island and he died. And then we noticed, wait a minute, he's alive again. And it's the kind of thing when you experience it, it's often in the periphery of our attentional range. So we're not totally sure, or it's like it's not something that matters to you on a daily basis usually. But sometimes these things come to mind and you realize, hold on, this is so weird, this is crazy, what's going on? And the Mandela effect applies to groups of people. Although there are personal Mandela effects where you notice something that changed, and it's pretty much the same thing as what I've been calling reality shifts. And that's a term that was first coined by PMH Atwater in her book, Future Memory. Chapter 2 is all about reality shifts. And she's using the term exactly the way we use it for Mandela effect, for reality shifts. So I want to make sure to give her credit. But the Mandela effect is really becoming more and more of a mainstream topic. It was recently reported as being true scientifically, in the sense that there's something to it. There was a recent University of Chicago paper written about this, and they were showing that the way people collectively remember things, it's called misremembering, but it's not really misremembering. It's just remembering things differently than the way that they've supposedly always been. And that University of Chicago paper is extraordinary, because it shows that there are lots of different ways people might misremember things, but actually we are misremembering collectively pretty much the same way in lots of lots of occasions. So there's something to it, and I'm sure we'll be hearing a lot more about that. I'll be writing a book about the Mandela effect. I will definitely include that research by the University of Chicago researchers and anything else that's coming out. But tonight, what I'd like to talk about is this idea that we are facing these challenging times with the recognition that opportunities exist for us to remember our true nature, and for us to connect with the fundamental inspiration that each of us uniquely feels, and sense our own core purpose. So it's really what matters to us. And I love talking with dowsers. I love the dowsing community, because dowsers, I think, of all people, have such a clear awareness of the importance of acknowledging this connection that we have to other conscious agents, and to this awareness that there's this meaning behind events and things. So clearly, this is an excellent time for all of us to dream the most desired possibilities into reality. And we can do this by lucid living in this waking dream. So tonight, I've got 5 different sections here. This talk I'll start just with some philosophy, and it won't get too heavy. I'm just going to be touching on some philosophical touchstones, and then going through some physics of reality. Now, this is very important, I feel, because it gives us the basis to understand this idea of conscious agency. And I'll describe what that means. And then we'll get into the reality shifting experiences, what's happened, and how we know that we can actually have this effect on reality. And then we'll close out by getting into some lucid dreaming and lucid living, some tips on how to do that. So for the philosophy of reality, I think it's important for us to recognize that it's difficult to prove anything when you get into these ideas of what is reality, because it's fundamentally rather enigmatic. It's ephemeral. It's something that we can't quite pin it down with objective measurements and say, here it is. Reality must be experienced. Things like falling in love, feeling a sense of purpose in our lives, all of these things, they cannot be objectively measured. They can only be recorded if we write in our journal, if an experiencer like myself describes what happened, but it can't be something that everyone experiences exactly the same way. One of the oldest reports of this ineffable presence of somethingness, it's called the Tao by Lao Tzu, who wrote in the Tao Te Ching, there was something undifferentiated and yet complete, which existed before heaven and earth. Soundless and formless, it depends on nothing and does not change. It operates everywhere and is free from danger. It may be considered the mother of the universe. I do not know its name. I call it Tao. I love this. This is just masterful piece of writing altogether. But let's see a couple of other ones. It's not just from China. Here we go to the Bhagavad, try to pronounce this correctly, Bhagavad Gita. And this passage that I'm be quoting here just says, know that as imperishable, which pervades everything, no one can bring about annihilation of this indestructible spirit. So again, it's getting to that essence of the ineffable something greater than what we see in the material world. From the Bible, I love this passage in Luke. And he said, to you it has been granted to know the mysteries of the kingdom of God, but to the rest it is in parables, so that seeing they may not see, and hearing they may not understand. So again, with this concept that there's something beyond the measurable, something beyond what we can pin down. And And then, of course, Plato's allegory of the cave. If you're not familiar with this, here's a picture of it just depicting the idea that reality might be something like watching shadow puppets on a screen. So if people, for example, had been kept in a cave, they might think the real world is simply the shadow play of a puppet show that they're watching on the wall. To them, that's reality. But there's another level that we can access where you recognize, no, there's someone feeding the fire that creates the light that casts the shadows of the puppets on the wall. And so this is that allegory of the cave. And this is kind of a strange concept, but it's showing one of the earliest viewpoints that reality is very illusory. And this idea came up again recently in the movie The Matrix. Here we've got an image of Neo stopping the bullets that were being fired at him once he'd recognized that he can awaken within the illusion and he can master that level of consciousness, which is capable of coming face to face with the artificial intelligence bad guys in that movie, and really recognizing that there are two levels of living. One, which is that illusion that he's becoming a master of, and then one in the movie The Matrix, where he's his regular self. And so the idea in this movie is that you can awaken within the illusion and learn to play with this mind-matter interaction. And this, of course, is the stuff that shamans the world over, all on every continent on the planet for thousands of years have actually known about.
So would that be our reality shifting?
Yes.
Kind of being awake within the dream or conscious within the dream?
Exactly, yes. And so this idea of awakening is a very old idea. And I'm just showing some of these philosophical touchstones. But for those indigenous wisdom keepers who recognize that we can awaken within this dream, that's been known about for, like I said, thousands of years. And so the shamans have been the keepers of that knowledge, recognizing that they can have a dream, they can have a lucid dream even, they can have real dreams where they're within the dream time and accessing, you know, the reality that's underneath the physical world that we see. So it's kind of like what we see in the physical world is a little bit like Plato's cave, going back to that image. So we see the shadows on the wall, but people like the shamans and the reality shifters and the lucid dreamers are the ones that can come and go from the cave and work within the dream realm, which is the actual real realm. And today in this talk, I'll be describing some philosophers and scientists who agree that that is the true nature of reality. And I'm one of them, so I definitely also agree with that. So let's go into the physics of reality. That's our second point of the 5 points we're covering tonight. And I'm going to start with a famous quote from the father of quantum physics, Max Planck. And he said that he regards consciousness as fundamental. I regard matter as derivative from consciousness. We cannot get behind consciousness. Everything that we talk about, everything that we regard as existing, postulates consciousness. So it's a very important idea to keep this in mind. And I'm now going directly to 8 points of agreement between physicists and Native Americans. And this comes from dialogues between Western and Indigenous scientists that was conducted back in 1993, documented by Dan Moonhawk Alford, who I knew and am very blessed to have known. And he was part Native American. And also he was a very skilled philosopher. He's kind of, he described himself as existing at the lonely crossroads between, philosophy and consciousness studies and so forth. But this gathering brought together David Bohm, who is the famous physicist who came up with the holographic interpretation of quantum physics, with, of course, Dan Moonhawk Alford, and some linguists. And also Leroy Littlebear was, I think, the host of this first gathering. And what's important about the points of agreement is it gives you a little bit of a sense of what we heard from the philosophy. Like, for example, number one, everything that exists vibrates. So you kind of get that sense that everything's moving, that movement is the nature of who we are. We're basically a verb. Everything is verbing, everything is moving. That goes with number 2, everything is in flux, constantly changing. So there's no such thing as something static. Number 3, the part unfolds the whole. Okay, this gets kind of weird, but we're definitely going into this tonight. We're going to be talking about subjectivity compared with this idea that we tend to assume in Western philosophy and science that objectivity is the key. Instead, we'll be looking at this idea of subjectivity. Number 4, there's an implicate order to the universe. So there's like a hidden order that's maybe secret. Maybe we don't know exactly what it is, but we can feel it, we can sense it. Number 5, this totally reminds me of what Lao Tzu was saying. This ecosphere is basically friendly. Yes. So it's safe, it's not dangerous, not scary. Number 6, nature can be taught new tricks. And that's gets
very interesting.
It isn't, I know, isn't it?
Are we going to get into some examples of that?
Oh yeah. Yeah, definitely. Toward the end of the talk, we'll be getting into that.
Okay.
Okay, number 7, quantum potential is similar to spirit. So it's just finding a similarity in language. Because these are linguists getting together with indigenous elders and wisdom keepers, with scientists, they were noticing that this idea of quantum potential and like all possibility and superposition of states, all those things, that's similar to the way spirit really works. It's like, oh, this looks similar, we can feel it. And then number 8, there's the principle of complementarity, which is to say that it's not like something is either a particle or a wave. It can be a particle and a wave. It's kind of like, it's not just true and false. It's also not true, not false, and true and false. So in other words, you can have a particle that is also a wave, and both can be true, even though that sounds crazy. So it's
that's the cosmic and.
Yes. It's like improv at the heart of reality.
Yeah. So the fourfold logic is true and false.
Yeah, so it'd be true,
Mm-hmm.
and then false, and then true and false, and then not true, not false. And those would be, so it's a way of recognizing, and that comes from some of the Eastern cultures that have that built into their thinking and their language. It's not such a commonality within the Western philosophy and Western ways of doing things and thinking, but it needs to be now that we're getting into quantum computing, because it will be the way that quantum logic and quantum processing works. And it's built right into reality, this principle of complementarity. So these are points of agreement. And when you find these points of agreement, you know you're onto something. And so I'm so glad that Dan Moonhawk Alfred made these notes and wrote this paper. And I'm so glad that this meeting occurred.
That sounds like it was pretty groundbreaking.
It was awesome. I went to some subsequent meetings back when they were still having them, and they were amazing. Changed my life for sure. Okay, this next slide shows the objectivity assumption, and I'm only introducing it because we take it for granted. We tend to assume when we go to school, we're taught in most colleges and high schools and anywhere we go, this idea that scientific objectivity is a property of various aspects of science. And it's this idea that scientific claims, methods, results, and even the scientists themselves are not or should not be influenced by particular perspectives, by value judgments, by community bias, or personal interests. Objectivity is often considered to be an ideal for scientific inquiry, a good reason for valuing scientific knowledge, and the basis of the authority of science and society. What is this? It's the idea that there is a truth out there that's the same for all of us. And actually, I'm putting this slide up here so you can take a good look at it and recognize, okay, this is just an assumption. You know, this is something that we tend to assume, but that's what it is. It's a huge assumption. And we see it's an assumption when we take a look at this experiment right here, which has been called the most elegant experiment in all of science. That includes all fields of science, but here it's physics, quantum physics, and it's called the double slit experiment. And it only consists of a few different basic parts. This image that you see on the screen shows a scientist There are two pictures. On the left, the scientist is looking at the device, which simply includes a particle emitter. So it's sending one little quantum particle at a time, like one little photon at a time. And the thing in the middle, right in front of the scientist, is a little, it looks like two doors side by side. So those are the double slits in a little barricade device that's right there in the middle. And then over on the right side of our picture, we see a screen, and that's where the scientist is looking to see what happens. And what's interesting is in one image, the scientist is looking at the image, and those little balls of one photon at a time are a little bit like paintballs, and they're hitting the screen after passing through one or the other of the slits. And they kind of create a little splatter pattern like you'd expect to see, showing the kind of the images on the screen of two skinny doorways, because that's pretty much what the double slits are. The scientist is scratching his head in the picture on the right, because what's happening there is, for some reason, and I'll explain what's going on, based on where the detection device is, now instead of getting that paint splatter pattern that would be normal, instead, with one photon going through at a time, we see instead of that, the two little ball patterns, paint splatter patterns, we're seeing something that's called a diffraction pattern, which is much more like what you see when you throw a pebble into a pond and you see little ripples on the surface. If you throw two pebbles in the pond, that's where you get the diffraction pattern, where the waves either constructively interfere and get taller and deeper, or destructively interfere and cancel each other out. And so this cancellation pattern is surprisingly showing up on one of the screens. And that's a head scratcher for the scientist, because the only difference is where the observational device has been placed. So when the observational particle detector is placed in between one of those two slits, and we know for sure which slit it went through, then the whole experiment behaves like the picture on the left, with the paintballs, the photons acting like paintballs. When you instead are not measuring the particle detector there, but you're just doing it like at the screen or somewhere else, then you get this very interesting diffraction pattern. And that means the observer makes a difference. The observer affects what is being observed. And so this is the beginning of a very disturbing truth, an uncomfortable truth for quantum physicists when it was first noticed, which is that apparently the way that we observe something absolutely changes everything. And that flies in the face of this assumption that we'd made some time ago about objectivity. These quantum experiments have also interfered with several other assumptions as well, such as thinking that we can only have a local effect. Quantum physics is showing us entanglement of quantum particles can create the opportunity for non-local effects, for spooky action at a distance.
So question here, just I want to hear you say it. Science is not fixed. It's not solid. It's not just one thing, right? I mean, it is always changing. It's evolving. It's how do you define science?
Yeah, science really is ideally supposed to be presenting us with opportunities to come up with an observation of what's happening in nature, and then to make a hypothesis, like a guess as to what we expect might happen. Then we can design an experiment. We can conduct the experiment. Other people should be able to also conduct the experiment, see how their results compare with ours. And then we can see how do those results from the experimental test compare with what we expected, what the original hypothesis said to begin with. So that's the scientific method. The scientific method does implicitly depend a little bit on this objectivity that ideally we would hope, or I think scientists were hoping, that the bias or the worldview or the perspective of the given researcher would not affect the results. Based on this very simple double slit experiment, I'm not so sure we can make that assumption. And we'll be looking at some other experiments in this talk as well. In fact, I want to bring up just one more idea, just to make sure people are familiar with it. There's something known as Schrödinger's cat, based on Erwin Schrödinger, who was a physicist, and he asked this kind of ridiculous question, which was, he's taking a look at the bizarre phenomenons of quantum physics, looking at the strange behavior of these quantum particles that are also waves, that are also then particles. And he's saying that's ridiculous, because if you say that something like me or you or a cat, for example, let's take a look at a cat, he said, let's put an imaginary hypothetical cat in an imaginary box. And in the box, we'll also put a vial of poison gas that can be released, but we don't know whether the poison gas has been released. This is where we bring in the quantum particle. We will base the entire process of how and when that poison gas may or may not be released by virtue of the random radioactive decay of basically this radioactive material. So there is the quantum component of the experiment. The quantum component would be that radioactive decay, whether it's actually deciding like, okay, I'm going to trigger this random device, which will then trigger the hammer, which breaks the glass, which releases the cyanide poison, which kills the imaginary cat. So no cats, no physical cats were harmed in this experiment. It's only a thought experiment. But the whole point that Schrödinger was making is this is ridiculous, because we're saying that the cat is both alive and dead. When you say that this quantum particle is also a wave, for example, when you say it's either a wave or a particle or it's both, that's equivalent to saying that the cat is simultaneously both alive and dead, that there are two realities that both exist. And only that point of actual measurement, when we actually open the box to take a look, and you finally bring in a real observer, the scientist in this case, who takes a look to see, is the cat there? Only then do we know. So this is an important concept about the superposition of states. Entanglement is another super important concept within quantum physics. These are very important to keep in mind when we look at the true nature of reality and when we work with changing reality through lucid dreaming and reality shifting. The objectivity assumption has been kind of falling apart for some time. Thomas Samuel Kuhn, he's a philosopher who pointed out, far from being magisterial in its objectivity, science was conditioned by history, society, and the prejudices of scientists. When we look at whether objective reality actually exists, we can look at things like these two visual things, puzzles. The one on the right, so you can see which animal that you're noticing. People can put it in the comments if they want, whichever came first. I know I've seen this before, so I see both. So if you see both and it seems like they go back and forth like they do for me, then that's like seeing two realities and recognizing that you're comfortable in that superposition of states. So if this is your first time, then you might just see one particular animal and it just looks like that and it doesn't really flip-flop. And once you hear what they both are, then maybe you can see like, oh, there's the other one. So it's kind of interesting what you're noticing right now. And then the cartoon on the left side shows two people looking at a figure on the ground. One says 6, the other one says 9. And it actually looks like a 6 from the 6 perspective, and it looks like a 9 from the 9 perspective. And the caption says, just because you are right does not mean I am wrong. You just haven't seen life from my side. And that's true of, I'll just say what these animals look like, either a rabbit, which the rabbit's looking off to the right, or a duck or some kind of bird looking off to the left. And I co-authored a paper on this topic, challenging the objectivity assumption. And it was basically called the quantum paradigm and challenging the objectivity assumption with one of the physicists, one of the hippies who changed physics. His name is George Weissman. That's a picture of us together. And basically what we wrote about is that the subject-object distinction has within the natural sciences degenerated into a dichotomy. That's where people are arguing one or the other. And this absolute split into separate realms is basically sort of a mistake, is what we're saying. Because when scientists are adopting the classical paradigm where the object pole of experience, known as quote unquote objective reality, can be studied independently from the subject pole, the experiencer, then we're operating with a presupposition that this procedure is yielding some fundamental description of nature. The subjective is often eliminated altogether as a fundamental category and reduced to an epiphenomenon of objective processes. And that's what we're basically arguing against. So we published this paper back in 2017, and it, rather remarkably, within a short range of time, an experiment was conducted to show that we were right, that there is no such thing as objective reality. And this paper was published 2 years after our paper, came out in 2019. Kaslov Bruckner at the University of Vienna in Austria was collaborating with Massimiliano Proietti at the Harriet Watt University in Edinburgh, Scotland. And together they created an amazing experiment. It was based on that double slit experiment. It involved lasers, beam splitters, and photons. And what they were doing is testing this idea of putting two observational devices at the same place and same time to see whether it might be possible that they could observe two different realities. And here is their experimental apparatus. And I'm not going to go into all the details of it, but they worked with 6 entangled photons, and they did indeed notice that the two observational devices at the same place, at the same time, absolutely were capable of witnessing two different realities. And to me, that should be, in my opinion, based on the kind of work I do with reality shifting, quantum jumping, and so forth, this should have been the headline for all of 2019, that this experiment was conducted and that those were the results. This is profound. So this Bruckner Proietti experiment is, to me, it's one of the greatest experiments of all time.
So would you, I mean, if I'm just super simplifying, so this is just one little interpretation, but maybe we've been experiencing duality, right, in this reality, and maybe really we're moving to quadrality now, right? Or is it beyond quadrality?
Yeah, I think it's beyond. I think we're seeing it in real life. We may not know we're seeing it, but when we see people clamoring about, that's fake news and so forth, I think we're actually witnessing, even within science, where people say follow the science, and you'll see, but wait a minute, are you really talking to each other? Because these scientists are looking at these facts, and these ones over here are looking at these others. It's really important, especially when this is happening, that we do have those conversations rather than presuming that just because we're following the science and we like these results, we're going to go with that one. I mean, that's okay. But the problem happens if we're starting to foist that on everyone without recognizing there may be other things happening here.
Right. Exactly. To limit people's choices, freedoms. Yeah.
Yeah, right. And so it's so interesting that the science itself and the heart of reality is showing us some rather big possibilities. So if we look beyond the chaos, because the first thing we're going to see is the chaos. We'll see, like, okay, Cynthia, this sounds kind of good, sort of, but it's kind of terrifying when you've got people saying follow the science and they're not agreeing and they won't talk to each other. Some of them will talk to each other, but it's up to each of us to recognize, number one, this may be going on. And number two, how do we move forward? How do we dream of a new future when we recognize that literally you can almost see whichever kind of science you want to find. You can actually choose realities that may be more positive than others. And that's at the heart of reality shifting. So these are interesting, good questions. Now, Carlo Rovelli is a scientist who I greatly admire and respect. He's also written about subjective reality. His expertise is he's got lots of expertises and lots of great books. So if you want to read one of the best books ever written on time, Carlo Rovelli wrote it. I forget the name of that book right now, but he writes for everyday people. So this person is very accessible. And what I'm focusing on right here is his work with what he calls relational quantum mechanics, recognizing this very idea that there's subjectivity that's implicit at the heart of everything. And so what this means is that when a measurement is made on a quantum system, like we saw with the double slit experiment, and the observer who's either looking like, do we put the detector device in the slit or do we put it at the final screen? at the point of observation, that system, according to the Copenhagen interpretation, undergoes a discontinuous collapse of the wave function. It pops the quantum wave function right there. But when the measuring apparatus and the quantum system to be measured are instead considered as one larger quantum system, say as observed by a second observer, then no collapse occurs until the second observer observes the apparatus. So he's, okay, well, I didn't really include a slide of the Wigner's friend experiment, but I'm going to go back a slide here. Now, this experiment I was showing you from 2019 with Bruckner and Proietti, and what they were doing is actually using this idea that you can have a direct observer of something, and then you can have an observer of the observer. And that's the little extra bonus feature that was brought in by Wigner, another physicist. And so it's called the Wigner's friend. And so this is why there were 6 entangled photons going on in this experiment, just to really show that it's like at the point of observation that makes the difference. And that's what Carlo Rovelli is talking about. It's really when you decide to make that observation. So if you're dowsing, and it's kind of like you decide when you'll be looking, that makes a difference. It's fascinating to consider this possibility when you recognize there's something beyond objectivity, and the level of observation totally makes a difference.
Wow, that just kind of made my head spin. I'm thinking about dowsing. We do have a
okay.
So we had a question about how would you say dimensions are kind of related to this work?
Right.
Where do they fit in the scheme of things?
Yeah, well, so far with the physics, I haven't seen that brought in except in string theory, which I'm not going to get into all that. That's another way to interpret quantum physics, of course, and to try to bring about a theory of everything. But where I see it actually is, and I'll be getting into this a little bit in just a moment. My talk's going to get into the perception and how we perceive things, so I won't be touching on that there. But basically, for each of us, if you recognize that there are levels of yourself, which you might be able to even douse and become familiar with, like when you recognize who am I, Cynthia, what level of consciousness am I operating at? That gets to be a very big question. How many levels are there? Can I douse to find out where I feel comfortable right now and what I'm looking at from a higher level of self? Is it possible to know more what's in the mind of God, if you will? And I'd say yes, it is. Yes, we can douse that. Yes, you can discern that. These are definitely places that you as dowsers can easily learn to start exploring. And I think that, when you got that beginner's mind and playful quality, you can have a lot of fun with this.
It just begs the next question. So how many versions of us are there? I guess
that is really interesting. As many as your heart and soul are invested in. So like if for me, I kind of prune my reality tree, and I do it consciously because I just want to ask, how good can it get? That immediately closes off and dead ends a whole bunch of things that I just have no interest in exploring. So, so I know that I'm consciously choosing not to go into certain realities. And I'm kind of pruning it like a bonsai tree where you'd prune both the branches and the roots. So I'm pruning the future and the past based on that conscious intention.
I love that vision, pruning the future and the past.
Right.
Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. Great questions, by the way. Okay, we're just a few more slides of physics, then we'll move on. And I know this can make people's heads spin, but it's important to touch on these topics. And also some of the best findings from all of physics have just been happening in the last few years. So I definitely want to cover it. Here we have some words from Bernardo Kastrup. Now he's commenting on the work of Carlo Rovelli with that relational quantum mechanics we just looked at. And here's Bernardo saying one of the weirdest implications of quantum mechanics is that different observers can give different equally valid accounts of the same events. Like you can be standing side by side witnessing something, you think it's the same thing, but you did not necessarily see the same thing. Okay, this is huge because as highlighted by Carlo Rovelli in his relational quantum mechanics, This means there should be no absolute observer-independent physical quantities. All physical quantities, the whole physical universe, must be relative to each of us, to the observer. The notion that we all share the same physical environment must therefore be an illusion. I know this stuff's mind-bending, but these are who I consider to be the top thinkers of our time. So I really want us to keep this in mind. And it's positive. It's all good.
Well, yeah, because you talk about, I mean, people growing up in the same family, everyone has a vastly
Yes.
different experience. People watching an accident will all have seen different things.
You know, there's something interesting about that same family idea, because we tend to assume with the objectivity assumption we had the same family, but did we really? I have a younger sister, and did she really grow up in the same family? No, she did not, because she grew up in a family with an older sister. Just right there, you can start. I know your mind is spinning, but it's like, okay, even right there, none of us grew up in the same family. If you're a middle child, nobody else was the middle child, not exactly. So we did not grow up in the same families, even though we tend to assume we did. We did not. And things were completely different. I'm gonna,
Is everybody's head spinning or your mind bending yet?
yes, that means we're all here together. Good.
Yes.
Okay, thanks for bearing with us. Okay, this next slide, this is another one from beautiful Bernardo Kastrup's mind. He wants us to know mental states are real. Perfect for us to know as dowsers. So the physical quantities describe merely our perceptions. They are therefore relative to each of us as observers. What is really out there underlying our perceptions is constituted not by physical, but by transpersonal mental states instead. Perceived physicality is merely a representation of that surrounding mental environment brought into being by an act of observation. Brilliantly said. And again, it reminds me of those statements that I made at the beginning from the Bible, from the Tao Te Ching, basically showing that there's something that's realer than real, but it's not measurable. This is the last of the physics section slides. Basically, just to show you that even Stephen Hawking we know he was pretty out there. He was saying countless alternative worlds existed at the time of the creation of the universe. And his co-author, Thomas Hertog, here said, quantum physics forbids a single history. So I would agree with these guys. We know that we've got those many possible pasts. We also know we have many possible futures. And we're sort of moving along this point of all possibility in this moment right here, right now. And sometimes even right here, right now, we might be flip-flopping through an adjacent reality, an adjacent timeline.
But I think this is the good news.
It is good news. Because when you keep asking my favorite question, how good can it get? And you really ache with all of your soul and being like, I need to experience this. That's what I really need. No matter how crummy it looks. And it's not ironic and it's not a joke. You're really saying, how good can this get? We need to pull up. Let's pull onward and upward here. And then this is just a joke slide. This is I guess a father reading to his infant son a baby book called Quantum Entanglement for Babies. So it's just a reminder that just like dowsing, quantum physics and perception are also completely natural. We're meant to do it. We're built to do it. We're built to understand it. So it's all part of nature. Okay, so then we'll exit that physics. Thank you for holding together there. May have gotten a little drowsy, but that's good because we'll be going into a dream state. But this third thing, the middle of this talk is about conscious agency. So what is conscious agency? Well, basically it has to do with the way that we interpret our perceptions. And here's a cartoon by Charles Schulz, Peanuts. We've got Linus talking to Charlie Brown. He says, so if I'm aware that I am aware, then that is not awareness, in that there is a division between the observer and the observed. Okay, it's kind of funny. Again, mind goes tilt, like, what's going on? That's Linus for you.
Is that quantum physics humor?
Exactly, it is. And it gets into this idea of consciousness. What if levels of observation, these levels within our social groups, levels within each of us, like my mind, my heart, my gut, I can have gut feelings, heartfelt feelings, and have a vision, like a vision board, an intention of what I think I want. What if these levels are at the root of consciousness itself? What if when we perceive something like a butterfly on our nose, and then we're then interpreting that, like, okay, it's safe, something landed on my nose, but I'm okay. It's just a butterfly. It's cute. And so we're interpreting the perceptions. It's not something to be terrified of. And then we can change these perceptions and interpretations. One of the great philosophers, I think of all time, was Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz. Coincidentally, he's one of the two inventors of calculus as well, which, and calculus itself delves into this whole idea of levels of perception, really, integrating and so forth, and differentiating. And what Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz said in the book New Essays on Human Understanding was conscious perception arises gradually by degrees from perceptions that are too minute to be noticed. And that's, in other words, unconscious perceptions. And also the big idea, the one that's to me the showpiece of everything he presented, and he lived back 1646 to 1716, a long time ago. But he views consciousness as requiring both a first order perception, like the butterfly landing on the nose, and then a second order reflective perception, like, it's safe, it's a butterfly, of the original perception. So the first perception is something's on my nose. The second order is, it's a butterfly. And so he says it is good to make a distinction between perception, which is the internal state of the monad representing external things, and apperception, which is consciousness, conscience, or the reflective cognition of this internal state, which is not given to all souls, or at all times to the same soul. Okay, so these are important things to keep in mind, because who am I? Who is the observer? It's really important to notice we are levels of awareness. That question that came up in this talk today about dimensions, it's a great way to look at these levels within ourselves of perceptual acuity and our ability to be who we are. Okay, Donald Hoffman is a researcher, an author, a scientist who I have so much respect for, and he is one of the world experts on perception, such as visual perception. And at the same time, he's got some really out there ideas that I think are fantastic. He describes the contents of perception as being like icons on a computer desktop. Just like when you've got a little trash icon on your computer, so you can throw a file into the trash. What's really happening? Did you really throw your file into the trash? Well, no, you just sort of moved, you clicked your mouse and you moved one thing to another place. So the icons represent something, but what's really happening is quite different. And that's what Donald Hoffman says we're doing with every single one of our senses. They're all interpreting things that are so-called out there, but what we see is not really what it is at all. It's just an interpretation.
We have now entered the twilight zone.
Oh, yes, we are totally there. And then here's another researcher, Carl Friston, and he basically has shown that organisms navigate through the environment based on perceptual encoding. So we mirror true reality, and by doing the, if we did do mirroring, that would not allow organisms to retain their structural integrity. So we're just constantly encoding things. It ties in with what Dr. Donald Hoffman was saying. And so together, these ideas show us that reality is kind of like dashboards of perception, kind of like if you're an air traffic control center or NASA or something. You've got one of those massive control scenarios with all these screens up on the wall. And therefore, you're kind of scanning to see what's going on. And that's kind of what's happening. So between Hoffman and Friston, they're showing our assumptions that we can measure physical reality according to physical senses is not really what's happening. Instead, we're just encoding everything. It's all a simulation, in other words. Great big simulation.
I have heard that before. And so it seems like we mostly react to reality, instead of, I guess, stepping into more of the the driver perceivers, I don't know, stepping into a different seat.
Yes, and that's what we're talking about tonight in this talk, is the idea of you can go back and forth. You can identify with being consciousness, with being one with the Tao, being aware of your conscious agency as operating outside of space-time. And when you do that, then you're accessing, like a shaman would, the true nature of reality, and you can start getting results within physical reality that in the future that correspond and correlate with what you're co-creating in that dream plane. And that's what the shamans have been doing. And that's what lucid living is really all about.
Yay.
Yay, I know. This guy, Tony Bell, he has, I got to see him give a talk at UC Berkeley at the Redwood Center for Neuroscience. And I just loved what he was saying, because I'd meditated that morning, and what came through was exactly what he ended up talking about, which blew my mind. But of course, this is another example, of course, that reality is, and our conscious awareness is flowing through levels. So Tony Bell, it's hard to find his work because he kind of went kind of low profile, but here he is in all his brilliance. And he said biological order comes from information flows up and down levels, and basically, through emergence and submergence. There's no such thing as noise. So these are concepts that he's sharing, that level switching networks exist in all living matter. We see it in the neuroscience of animals, and we can also start noticing it everywhere. The fact that there's no such thing as noise means that we're picking up these sorts of intuitive insights, things that we might be able to douse for, absolutely. And there's meaning everywhere, that there's no such thing as some random disconnected event, that instead, if you look for it, you can start finding meaning and purpose. And this ties in, of course, with what I was writing about with George Weissman, my co-author of that paper about the quantum paradigm. Basically, distinctions are the key. So the quantum paradigm that we were proposing basically focuses on these experiences that we have, which are very subjective, and we're calling it distinctions, is the whole heart and soul of it. It's operating within consciousness. It is very unique to each and every one of us. And now I'm going to come right back to Donald Hoffman, because bless his heart, he has basically said, and we recently had him on a live stream for the International Mandela Effect Conference, and I've also interviewed him on my podcast, Living the Quantum Dream. And he said that space-time is dead, that everything we can measure, that idea that that's all there is ridiculous, because now we've got this proof coming through. The beginning of it is coming through in the form of that image under his face. That's the amplituhedron. And that amplituhedron is the beginning of a new math. It's the beginning of a new science. And it's going to start showing us how you can look at the seeming disparity and impossibility of bringing together quantum physics with relativity. And this is what Carlo Rovelli was talking about too, because Carlo Rovelli loves bringing these two together. This is where he's got his relativistic quantum mechanics. But when you do that, it's that difficulty of bringing quantum mechanics together with gravity. That's exactly what the authors of the paper on the amplituhedron have said. And that paper was published in 2013, and it was published by Nima Arkani Hamed with Jaroslav Trinka. And they said quantum mechanics and gravity together make it impossible to have local observables. So it's a pretty deep paper. And what Donald Hoffman is saying is a little bit mind-blowing. But the big idea, again, as always, that we're the big constant here, it's just back to the Tao again. If you look at that amplituhedron and you think, oh, that's the Tao, that's the ineffable, that's the unknowable, but we are connected to it. There's meaning there. There's a hidden order. Then yes, exactly.
So I guess if I had to simplify it,
Yeah,
for all the non-scientists that might be watching this, is that nothing's fixed, nothing is set in stone, everything is mutable, changeable, and we are a part of that process. We're not necessarily the effect of something outside ourselves.
And there's a greater fundamental reality that's more than what we think we see, which is good news when you want to do some lucid dreaming, lucid living, reality shifting, because you start, instead of looking at the reality that you think is all there is, you can start out knowing, no, that's not all there is. It's like a simulation in the sense that it's like a dream, and it can change, and it will change when you meditate and when you connect with that true fundamental reality. That's the true foundation, the true basis, the true, it's like the Tao. It's like what's really real. And this philosopher, Thomas Nagel, his view from nowhere also shares that same perspective, that it's possible to realize that our perceptions are caused by actions of things around us through their effects on our bodies. But we can also postulate that since the same qualities that cause perceptions in us also affect other things and can exist without causing any perceptions at all, their true nature must be detachable from their perspectival appearance, and that therefore they need not resemble it. So what's really operating at that foundational level may or may not show up in our measurable reality form. And then number 3, Thomas Nagel's third point, we form a conception of true nature operating independently of any perspective, the view from nowhere. And again, there we are, the Tao, the amplituhedron. It's kind of like that foundational essence of what is, that's mind-blowing to comprehend in its fullness.
So is it appropriate to call that energy, or do you like essence better?
Different people have different names for it. Like in Taoism, they call it Tao. If you're very spiritual, you could actually really call it God, or you could call it the creator. You can call it source, whatever you want to call it. But there is something in that nothingness that's quite real and it's quite conscious, and it's kind of like got the basis of everything right there. It's a little bit hard to describe because it doesn't fit into anything that we can measure, that we can all objectively agree on.
Exactly.
Yeah, so it's this whole talk is a bit mind-blowing and mind-expanding, so I'm glad you record it, then people can come back to it, because I think that might help. I'm realizing, some of these ideas, if it's the first time you've seen them, you might want to soak on it, soak it in, absorb it, and then come back and take another look. But next, we're going to go into reality shifting. What is that? Because that is the art of lucid living. And so I'm just going to go through. This is what I've spent the last more than 20 years of my career looking at, working with, writing about. And reality shifts can involve big things like this very large, this is a time clock, a sundial.
Sundial.
Yeah, it's located, you can see how big it is because that's my young daughter who climbed up to the top of it when she was a little girl. So it's about, I don't know, 10, 12, 15 feet high. The thing is huge. It's made of concrete and it looks like it's been there for decades, but it showed up one day when I was on a walk there with some friends and we were talking about reality shifts, and I was asking if they'd ever experienced them. And then lo and behold, right in front of us is something that had never been there every time that we'd come to that same place before. And it's even got a date on it, 1970. We saw it in the 1990s. So it's been, at that point, it had been there over 20 years. It was a gift from a sister city in Japan. Pretty mind-blowing to my friends who said, like, have you ever seen this before? And so we had the collective shared experience that it was new to all of us. But at the same time, it had been there. So this is that experience of it's both been there for more than 20 years, yet it's brand new to us. Both are true.
So do we think that is another way? Would you say that that's maybe like a different timeline?
That's one way to look at it. I did follow up and I contacted the harbor master because this was down at the Berkeley Marina. And I had questions like, I know it sounds crazy, but I was trying to sound like a sane person. Like, what's the history of this sundial? And has it always been there? Was it taken out or, restored? Like, no, it was just installed and it was there consistently. Showed up as the plaque suggests in 1970. Nothing unusual to report about the sundial. No reason, for example, that my friends and I would have seen no trace of it. We'd been walking right through where it was for many times, and then suddenly it just shows up. So a timeline is another way to talk about it. Sure.
Alternate reality.
Alternate
Timeline.
realities.
Mhm.
And here's another example from the town of Bolton in the United Kingdom in England. Half of the residents of this town remembered that their museum, the natural history section, had contained a prominently displayed dinosaur. And they were wondering, when's it coming back? You know, it's like our museum used to have a beautiful dinosaur. I remember seeing it. It was my favorite thing as a child. Why can't it come back? Whatever you're doing with it, bring it back. And it was kind of a little bit of a consternation to the leaders of the town, because there was no such dinosaur. There was no record that there ever had been. The official history showed no trace of a dinosaur ever having been there, despite some 50% of the town's populace remembering it quite clearly.
Wow.
And so it was such a strong thing that the town leaders purchased a dinosaur skeleton and installed it just so that the dinosaur came back, the one that everyone remembered. Yeah, it's kind of amazing. I've documented in a series of surveys some of the things people are noticing with reality shifts, and I've published it in my book Quantum Jumps and also on the website realityshifters.com. In 2000 and 2013, I was asking people if they've noticed synchronicity and coincidence, and we got in the high 90% of people that did notice that. People find parking places where needed. They'll witness things going missing. They'll see people and animals healing after prayer. They'll notice time slowing down, stopping, and speeding up. They'll notice things move without being touched. They'll notice changes to business hours, very inexplicably, kind of overnight, as if it's always been that way, but it wasn't. They'll notice doors that lock or unlock by themselves. They'll notice things having been transformed, like the sundial just showing up out of nowhere. They'll notice bent spoons, keys, coins, or other things. They've seen people, animals, and things just literally appear where they weren't before. They've seen objects travel distances or teleport. And they've seen people, plants, and animals disappear. So it's just sort of a smattering of some of the standard things that are observed to varying degrees. You can see some are more typical occurrences than others, but all of them count as types of reality shifts, or what we now.
Everyone can relate to that missing item, right? You know, you put it in a particular place, you've seen it there, you did not move it, you've searched over and over and over thoroughly, it's not there. You come back later, it's there. And it's a way that you could not have missed it. Absolutely. Yeah, that one's like socks in the laundry. People often notice there's a missing sock and the machine did not eat it. It's just gone. But like you said, it could be just the keys, it could be the wallet, it could be the coat, it could be just some simple item. And often what I notice is that these things go missing when we're ungrounded and energized, kind of anxious. So you're in a hurry, you don't have time for this sort of thing. And that's exactly when it goes missing. Because you're, at least in my experience, when I've been ungrounded, meaning that I'm not grounding my own energy field, that's when these reality shifts tend to go haywire. I get a lot of reality shifts to the point that they're pretty common for me, every day, every week. And it's more pleasant when they're positive reality shifts rather than things going missing and teleporting. How good can it get? Exactly. Right. So that's what I'm a strong proponent, that we all say that, think that, do that, and therefore experience very positive reality shifts. In 2005, I had a Reality Shifters survey specifically about the alive again phenomenon, what we now call the Mandela effect. This was before the Mandela effect. That terminology came into common use around 2009, 2010. But before that, I was doing a survey, and the people that were most commonly reported as being alive again included Bob Keeshan, who's the actor that played Captain Kangaroo on TV, Jane Goodall, and as far as I know, she's still alive today. Yes, I thought she had died back, and then I saw some special with her, and she's, I don't know, whatever age she is, I thought she'd passed too, and I'm so glad she hasn't. Yeah. And then Larry Hagman,
That was a big one for several people. And then Bob Hope, Jack Palance, B. Arthur, Ed Asner, Walter Cronkite, Mariel Hemingway. So these things change. You know, if you check now, you'll see other names are popping up. Of course, Nelson Mandela. But the point is that this is a very big phenomenon. And I think in the past, Mark Twain, you know, kind of made light of it, like the rumors of my demise have been greatly exaggerated, you know.
Mhm.
And so, but I think that may have been a very early case of the Mandela effect. And we just didn't call it that. It would be called the Twain effect, you know. So it probably happened before Mark Twain. I think it's been going on a long time. And then who experiences the reality shifts of the Mandela effect? I know we want to get into the dreaming, so we'll just go through this. This is a pretty detailed slide, but I did a survey to find out, based on the Myers-Briggs interest inventory, what kind of personality types are more likely to witness reality shifts and the Mandela effect. And the long story short, it seems like 14% of the population are witnessing some 62% of reality shifts and the Mandela effect. And that's interesting. And these are people that are intuitive feelers. And those are people who would be doing that kind of self-awareness of what level of consciousness are they using. You know, they might be more likely to be dowsers, quite likely. So that would be your INFPs, your INFJs, for example. And what these letters mean, I would be introverted, E would be extroverted. The next letter would be sensing or intuiting. And what we're noticing is it's the intuitives that are more self-aware of these internal processes. And then between thinking and feeling, they tend to be the feelers more than the thinkers. And then the judging and perceiving is the J or the P. So it seems like intuitives naturally understand quantum logic. I think all of us are capable of it. So just because you might be a different personality type doesn't mean that you can't lucid dream and lucid live. Of course you can. It's just sort of like showing that there's a preponderance of intuitive feelers.
That's very interesting.
And then I looked into what's going on. There are lots of theories about why is the Mandela effect happening. And to me, everything points back to consciousness. Some people say it's a simulation, but I would say let's look deeper, because what is real when you're simulating something? You know, it's going to be the Tao. It's going to be that foundational layer. It's going to be consciousness. Some people say it's just mistaken memories. It's like the memories are screwed up somehow. You're making mental errors. But what is behind all memories? You know, that's consciousness. Some people say CERN is behind it. They're up to no good. They're tampering with reality. But what's larger than any group of scientists? That again would be Source, the creator, the Tao, the foundational consciousness. And then what directs all outcomes in quantum physics? You know, basically, again, I just say consciousness, 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 consciousness. So you can say creator, source, God, Tao, consciousness, but it's that ultimate foundational consciousness that we're talking about here, the big C. Which brings us to the whole topic. And now we're ready. This is Lucid Dreaming and Living. Thank you for sticking with me through the preamble. It's important and you'll see why. Okay, because what is dreaming really? We dream every night. Some of us are aware of it. Some don't pay attention so much. But when you look at Aboriginal people from Australia, they will tell you that the dreaming is sacred. The dreaming is the ultimate reality. That this is what is, and everything that ever will be, all exists, and it's right there outside of ordinary space and time. And so they would say it's extreme hubris and pride on humanity's part to think that we're creating something, because they're saying, no, everything's in the dream time. The dreaming is all. So it's their way of honoring this very creative, verb-oriented reality. It's like those 8 points of agreement between the indigenous people of the United States and America and Canada also, as sharing those points of commonality with science. The Australian Aboriginal beliefs consider that this dream time is the basis of all reality, and it's there for us, so we can access it. It's there. here's another book that I highly recommend. This one is called The World is As You Dream It. It's written by John Perkins. And he also wrote a book called Confessions of an Economic Hitman. He's got a new version of that, New Confessions of an Economic Hitman. This book is about his story of living with the Peruvian shaman of the rainforest and his journey, recognizing that you can differentiate between true dreams and then fantasy. Fantasy would be like Hogwarts, where some people these days say they want to just live in Hogwarts to escape the harsh realities of our times. But the true dream would be going into the actual foundational reality. There's a difference between the two. There's a difference between dreaming from the head or from the heart. And this book has so much more than what I'm able to just mention here. If you love this topic, definitely read this book. Lucid dreaming, what is it? Okay, lucid dreaming is akin to a hybrid sleep-wake state. And basically, it happens when a person is sleeping and they are aware that they are dreaming. And they can thus control their dream's narrative to some degree. This would usually happen in that rapid eye movement part of sleep. It has been studied by neuroscientists. Here's a picture from, I think it's the UC Davis Sleep Lab. And the scientists in this case were noticing that when a dreamer was switching, shifting into lucid dreaming, they were requested, okay, okay, you're going to start lucid dreaming. When you start, give us a signal. And so they do that with little eye movements to show, like, okay, I'm in here, I'm asleep, but I'm kind of awake within the sleep. So I'm giving you that eye signal that you can recognize on the outside. And that gave the researchers the ability to track what was going on, to recognize that there's an increase in activity in the prefrontal cortex and the precuneus, which are associated with higher cognitive abilities, such as self-referential processing, which is what those intuitive feelers would be doing normally. When, it's a meditative thing. Being self-referential means you're aware of levels of self and also aware of a sense of agency. So let's get into some tips. Okay, if you want to get into lucid dreaming, how do you do it? Well, basically, you want to start by making sure you get enough dream sleep. So most of us in America, we tend to stay up too late with our devices, checking social media, watching a movie or something. You want to cut back on that and expand your sleep time as much as you can to make sure you're getting enough of it so that you're not starved for your dream sleep. The second thing is you can suggest to yourself, I will have lucid dreams. And that may seem really simplistic, but it's very powerful. When you tell yourself, tonight I'm going to have lucid dreams, and you just say that to yourself every day, then you definitely will. It's just a way of getting yourself all in alignment with that intention. You can also do some reality tests, and I would recommend doing it right now, like when you're awake. Just look at your hands. This is one of the techniques some lucid dreamers recommend. Just look at your hand and notice, how does your hand look? Does it look like a normal hand to you? If it does, then probably you're awake right now. And you can just make that a regular thing you're doing. So then when you're dreaming, you're just looking at your hand, and then you may notice, like, whoa, I'm wearing all these rings. Why am I don't usually wear like a ring, several rings on every finger, or my fingers are really long or something like that. Then you might suddenly be aware, whoa, this has got to be a dream because I don't ever wear that many rings, or my fingers aren't that long. So that's just one kind of a reality test. You can also, believe it or not, play interactive video games. And scientists are noticing that people that do that definitely are more likely to experience lucid dreams. So it's a good reason to play those games, especially if they're role-playing games. The next thing you can do is keep a dream diary. There's a cartoon here that says, it's kind of a joke, but there's a sleeping person in bed, and she's got a device hooked up to her head that's hooked up to a pen, drawing things that she's dreaming about. And it says, a device for writing all the amazing ideas you think up in the night when you're too tired to do anything about it. So that would be cool. But until such a device exists, the best thing to do is wake up, remember the dream, and write that down. And don't assume that you'll remember it for very long, because often we don't. And there are a couple more really good tips on lucid dreaming. One of them is called MILD, M-I-L-D, stands for mnemonic induction of lucid dreams, which simply means you wake up and tell yourself to remember you're dreaming. And another one is WBTB, which is wake back to bed. So you stay awake once you've woken up, stay awake at least 30 minutes, maybe a couple of hours, and then go back to sleep. Some of us can't afford to do that sort of thing, but if you're able to do that, some people say it works great for them. My personal tip is intend, you know me, how good can it get? I have a 0 tolerance rule for bad dreams. And you might wonder, why is that? Because in my reality, dreams are giving me information from the dream time. And so I'm intending that I'm directly connecting with reality when I dream. So for me, I'm aware that if something comes in that's a so-called bad dream, it's basically some kind of negative energy that I would wish to clear. So I will do that. And you can do this if you wish with just putting a dash of salt in a glass of drinking water next to the kitchen sink, dump it out every few days, have a standing intention of keeping the energy in your home very high, that it's a sacred place. I would highly recommend that. Just make that a process in your daily prayers and meditations to lift the vibratory frequency of your home and any place you frequent to the highest and best positive energies. When we do this together, I know that we can basically bring heaven to earth. But it's our choice. And if we don't do it, then you'll inadvertently end up with occasional bad dreams. But you don't have to. Nobody has to have bad dreams. And I find that when I recognize that, the fact that there is a bad dream developing is enough to wake me up in the dream. And then I'll realize, this is not okay. And I will instantly start clearing it and I'll realize this is a dream. But I would do this waking or sleeping either way. A couple of other tips that people don't usually mention. It has to do with those transitional states between wakefulness and sleep. And when you're first falling asleep, you have an opportunity to be aware of this sleep-wake state. And you can sometimes start a lucid dream when you're in that hypnagogic state. And this is often, there's an image here that shows, this is called Mavro Mattis's 4 stages of hypnagogia. The first stage is noticing, for example, it's not always the case, but some people notice flashes of light or color when you're falling asleep. The second stage would be floating, drifting faces, nature scenes. The third might be autosymbolic phenomena, kind of like symbols and shapes and things. And then the fourth would be starting these hypnagogic dreams, which you could also say, if you're awake in them, that is a lucid dream. That's a great way that I find quite helpful to go into a lucid dreaming state. And then when you're waking up from being asleep, you get another opportunity. Edison was said to use this technique, the hypnopompic state. And his Edison technique involved sitting in a chair and sleeping, like taking a nap, holding something heavy that makes a noise when it drops in one of his hands. When it hits the floor, then he wakes up. And so that transitional state for him would give him the benefit of inventions and ideas. So a lot of gifts can come from this lucid dreaming sleep-wake state. So all of these are great tips that you can try on a regular basis. See which ones work for you. And then when we get into lucid living, now we're taking the idea that you can lucid dream, of course, when you're sleeping, but you can also start operating with the same concept that you are pure consciousness and do some reality shifting in waking life. And one of the fun things that I'm sharing in this slide is the remarkable finding that back in the year 2011, that's 11 years ago now, there was a majority of physicists that were interviewed that agreed that all objects, including each and every one of us, can exist in superimposed states. And that was more than 2/3 of the scientists at that event that believed that's the case, that it should be possible for objects, no matter how big, to be prepared in quantum superpositions like Schrödinger's cat. And so the era where quantum theory was associated only with atomic realm appears to finally be over. And that's definitely true. There's a picture here of the quantum life being in two places at the same time. And we've got a researcher typing on the computer and somebody also having some fun looking through binoculars with a duck outdoors.
In one of your books, you tell a story where you had a vivid memory of being in one place, and then someone else at that exact same time that you knew you were home saw you out somewhere and was emphatic that they had seen you. So yeah, that's that
Yes.
being in two places at the same time.
Yeah, it's doable for all of us. And I think it helps to know that it's possible. What we're doing by reviewing the science is, I'm not trying to put everyone to sleep. It's actually, there's a reason for it because we have analytical, rational minds. And when we know that the science is moving, and we're now at a place where these ideas from these ancient ideas from shamanism are not so far out anymore. And this is actually the way the cutting edge scientists recognize that true reality operates. Neville Goddard was a great one for recognizing that we can change our conception of self. And he said that you can change your conception of yourself and you'll automatically change the world in which you live in. This is that whole subjective reality thing. So when you change, your world changes too. So you don't need to worry about whatever's out there, whatever seems to be what people are panicking about. You can focus on you and your experiences and really make that heaven on earth, make your world a paradise, and you can literally change everything. And Gurdjieff also said that you can choose to evolve your will and your character. He spoke about the evolution of mankind being the evolution of consciousness. Consciousness cannot evolve unconsciously. So it really is our job to, recognize that the evolution of man is the evolution of will, and will cannot evolve involuntarily. So we're choosing our character. We're choosing to ask a question like, how good can it get? Choosing to focus on the positive. And David Spangler, who also teaches and writes about these things, invites us to answer the question, how are you imagining yourself? This is that imaginal realm again that Henri Corbin talks about. Your imagination works inward upon you, and the effects of this flow outward into the world. Where I am part of the world, part of a flow of imagination through the world, you are a world shaped by your thoughts and feelings. That's the same thing I've been writing and talking about too. So let's get into this. What are the requirements for reality shifting? I think this is probably the most important slide of the whole show if you want to know what's important. It seems simple. It is simple, but it's huge. You need to align all levels of yourself. That question about dimensions of reality, all dimensions of yourself, all levels of yourself, from your head to your heart to your gut, what you need, what you love, what you desire needs to all be the same. So what you need, what you think you need, what you know you need, what you really truly love authentically, genuinely, and what you're envisioning for yourself and for others, they need to be one and the same. When you've got that, when you're lined up, it's like opening a combination lock. Finally, it opens. And if they're not aligned, then don't expect miracles. I mean, a miracle might occur, but it's going to be to your benefit to first take care of yourself and make sure that what you know that you need is what you love, and it is what you desire, and it matches what you know your soul and your spirit also intend for you. So that's the first one, and that's kind of the key of the whole thing right there. Secondly, you need to make sure you're energized. This is connecting to that Tao, that foundational reality, the divine source, the creator. This is how we recharge our internal energy. And thirdly, equally importantly, you need to be able to let go, to be detached from all those possible realities, yet still entangled with everyone and everything you love. And this is kind of like being of the world, but not in it, if you want to say it that way, being a particle and a wave. Letting go is really the key to just being able to shift between realities, choose a different timeline, end up in just guided by how good can it get, and the alignment and the energizing that you've done in an optimal place. And you can use your dowsing skills to do all these things. So that's the good news. That's where dowsers have a huge advantage, because this will give you the ability to know Am I aligned? Am I in alignment with all these levels? Am I fully energized? Have I fully let go? And then if not, these are things to work on. Some techniques you can use would be lucid dreaming, knowing that you're dreaming right now. And so telling yourself, like, right now, I, Cynthia, am dreaming. And I say that, and then I challenge myself to believe that. And I'm doing it on purpose because it jolts me out of thinking that I'm just here talking to you guys in a Zoom and having this conversation, and recognizing, no, this is like a dream. This is a dream. And the real me is operating in that Tao, in that foundational reality outside of any particular given physical moment. So these are the two ideas here: lucid dreaming when asleep, lucid living when awake. You can also do a meditation where you shift your awareness back and forth between being pure consciousness and of that no, nowhere, no when Tao state of being outside of space and time, and then back to your physical self. And so one of my favorite ways to do that is a nothingness meditation, just stopping all thought, just letting go of every attachment to anything, just going as much into nothingness as possible, and then coming out of that, then going back into that nothingness. So it's a way to activate and awaken the sense of being pure consciousness at that foundation level of being.
Can you guide us through a short, I know we don't have too much time. I would love for our members to experience this.
Yeah, we can do that. Let me see. I think I just have a couple more slides. This I just wanted to mention there's something called a starfish position. If you look at reality shifting, the kids on TikTok making it very popular, and all they're doing is turning off the left brain with a busy work activity like counting to 100. Keep your arms and legs separated so you can stay in that state of being pure consciousness. And then you can state affirmations. I have lots of these in my book, Reality Shifts. You just think and just constantly be repeating like a mantra. Right now, at this very moment, I'm shifting reality. Then the rest of these slides, I'm talking some more about the Mandela effect. We can shift together. We can choose timelines together. We can enjoy placebo effects for ourselves and others. It works for animals too. We can see Lazarus species coming back, plants and animals both. Here's the coelacanth fish, huge, and lots of them are back. They were extinct more than 100 years. They're back. Galapagos tortoise, you'd think it's too huge to hide. It was extinct, now it's back. We cover this regularly in the International Mandela Effect Conference every month on a live stream. We can see nature solving seemingly unsolvable problems. We're experiencing instant evolution. The Mandela effect apparently has moved our kidneys to a safer place. Lots of things are happening like this. And we can ask that question, how good can it get? So, and then the last two slides here, I'm just showing, if you wanted to follow up on what we're doing, you can go to imec.world and subscribe to, and then you'll be updated when we go to our live stream events each month. And we will have a conference again at some point. And then you can subscribe to my newsletter, realityshifters.com, and that comes out free every month. And there are gifts, free gifts when you sign up. And I don't share the newsletter list with anyone, neither does IMEC. And I'll give you the meditation ebook and an audio chapter and so forth. And so, yeah, let's do that. So this is the last slide. I'm just going to leave it there. Let's do a meditation together. I think that's the whole point tonight. We can't necessarily sleep unless someone happens to fall asleep while we do it, which is great. So instead, we're going to do a guided meditation, which will be very good. It'll be geared toward experiencing this sort of lucid state. So I'm just going to invite everyone to just go ahead and close your eyes wherever you are. Take some deep breaths. Recognize that all this information has been for a purpose, to soothe and reassure the rational, analytical parts of ourselves that may have thought that any of this might be outlandish or impossible. Hopefully you can recognize that good shifts are always possible, that we can experience lucid dreaming, that we can experience an intention to explore reality through a state of pure consciousness, trusting this very safe, beautiful Tao, source, creator, foundational reality. That's a very nurturing place for each and every one of us. And that the purpose of this lucid dreaming exercise will be to have a unique experience for yourself. And if you wish to have a group experience, we'll have that opportunity as well. So whichever one you want, you can choose. And in the form of consciousness, we all know what we're doing. I'll be available for the group. So if you want to join with me to make a wish for the best for all concerned, the best for all of creation, you can join me in that. And if you'd like to work on something subjective in your own world, you can do that. I'm also supporting you there. Either way. So just focus again on your breathing. We're going to use breathing as just a focal point if you like that. Just paying attention now to calming and relaxing yourself. If you're able to sit up and that feels comfortable, that's great. If you'd rather lie down, you can do that. And as you exhale, just imagine that you're recognizing you can let go of any concerns and other people's expectations, other people's viewpoints. We're going to let that go. You're going to focus on whichever your intention is for this lucid dreaming exercise. Just on the exhale, letting go of anything that's not that. When you inhale, breathing in just a pure sense of revitalization and love and energy. Sense of being completely connected to this beautiful source energy, this creator energy, this love. With an awareness that right now you are shifting reality. You are a reality shifter. You are a lucid dreamer. This is the true nature of who you've always been. And it's perfectly safe and wonderful and enjoyable to activate these qualities within yourself. You are being guided by a higher level of your own consciousness, or what you might think of as angelic realms. It is beautifully nourishing, nurturing, loving Tao, this foundational creative consciousness. If you prefer to think of it as the cosmos, that's fine. Whatever, however you wish to conceptualize it is just fine. Recognizing that right now we're inviting and welcoming this beautiful energy, this awareness. Whether you're focusing just on your own personal life, which is wonderful. I'm so glad you're doing that. Or if you wish to join with those of us who are also wishing for the best for all concerned, either way, whichever it is that you're choosing, you can now start to feel and sense a presence of this energy supporting you, knowing that you are a reality shifter. You are a lucid dreamer. These very strong abilities that have always been there for you are now becoming fully aligned with who you are and your core identity. You might now start to sense and see and know images or impressions or knowingness of what is being created. With this lucid dreaming, lucid living awareness, you can recognize that your consciousness is the true being, the true core identity of who you really are. You can feel these beautiful connections that you have to everyone and everything you love. You can feel the earth loves you. The cosmos loves you. I love you. Your loved ones in your life love you. You have this beautiful connection to the cosmos and to each and every one of us. I'm going to be quiet for just somewhere between a few seconds and maybe up to a minute. And in that quiet, those of you that wish to touch into this nothingness, you can join me with that. And if you're already feeling a sense that you are lucid dreaming, you can continue with that. Or you might feel a sense of guidance from your high self. So whatever feels right to you, we'll each be on our journeys at this point. So I'll be quiet just for a little bit here. Before I'm quiet, those of you that wish to experience that nothingness, it's beautiful, it's safe. To me, it feels like going into that place where the Tao, the cosmos, the creator, source, God, draws forth all that comes into being. Feels like the ultimate safe place to me, to be there. Feels like so much love. It's so quiet. It's so beautiful. It feels like everything stops and you can just feel the love. And there's no thought there. There's just beautiful nothingness. So if you wish to go there, you can join me. Otherwise, with whatever feels right for you, it's all good. And I'll be back in just a few seconds. Okay, and as I'm coming back, I'm keeping my eyes closed and just envisioning again that each and every one of us is a reality shifter. We are lucid living, we are lucid dreaming. This is what we came here to do. We're here with a purpose on earth at this time. This is our great awakening. We, each and every one of us, have a unique gift to share. I support your gifts and what you are sharing. When we bring this together collaboratively with a genuine wish from our heart and our soul and our mind, the fullness of our being, we're experiencing how good this can get for each and every one of us, then it is so. We are lucid dreamers. We are lucid livers. We are reality shifters. And it matters what we're doing in our personal lives. Working on just your personal life is the greatest thing you can do, the greatest gift you can give. There's no such thing as too small. You make a huge difference just to one person. And before we awaken and open our eyes, I'm going to set the intention that we will come back to the normalcy of our regular everyday lives. There's been an access to a lot of energy in this exercise. If you're used to running that much energy, then you're fine. But some of us need to have a closeout. So I'm going to do a very clear closing now, which just means coming back to ordinary reality, which means that you will not hear any pops, snaps, clicks. You'll not see surprising flashes of light or disturbances. Some of these would be carryovers otherwise. So I'm just bringing us back, each and every one of us, back to an ordinary state of reality, feeling fully grounded in who we every day ordinarily are, with the awareness that you really are a reality shifter. You are a lucid dreamer. You can access this again. Each time you do, it will get a little bit more noticeable, a little bit more beneficial, a little bit more enjoyable on the path of how good can it get. When you're ready, you can open your eyes.
Have a new reality.
Yes, I just realized I'm going to turn off share screen if I can find it. Here we are. Okay. I had that other screen up the whole time.
That was great. Thank you. Does anybody that is still with us have questions for Cynthia Sue?
I'm glad you were asking questions along the way, because this has been pretty
It's a lot of information.
it's a lot of information and it's very intense exercise. So little bit, it's a lot of everything.
There was a question, how would you describe the monad? I don't know if that's too big or grand to go into now, or
Yeah, I think, do they have a context for that? There's,
it was in someone's quote.
okay,
Something the monad.
that may have been, trying to remember where it was, maybe the Leibniz. Yeah, Leibniz talks about that. I don't get too much into that concept. I like Leibniz's ideas when it comes to these levels of consciousness. His ideas about the monad feel to me, we each take what feels right to us. And that part of where he was going felt like it was getting a little bit too much into its own headspace. And I'm more of the intuitive feeler. So the monad, it's a good concept, but personally, I haven't been using it. So I'll be honest.
I don't see any other questions here. You can raise your hand, you put something in the chat if you have. We could all just be sort of absorbing that experience, because I think it's
Right.
it was pretty rich.
One
I
thing
found
we
myself
can
kind
do-
of dabbling between the group and the individual, you know.
Yes. You'll be putting this on YouTube, so I can come back and answer questions there too, which would be good.
Oh yeah.
We
The
operate outside of this current moment.
so it's like using your imagination, right? I mean, it's the seeing yourself like it's already done.
Yeah, that's the dreaming. Exactly. That's this idea that so many viewpoints are sharing the same thing. And exactly, when you get into that real dreaming, the true essence of who we each are, then it's not fiction, it's not fantasy. We're capable of accessing the true, authentic core reality, where we all have a connection, where we are all entangled. And that is really powerful.
I notice sometimes that in dreams that I will be watching myself, and in other dreams I'm in the dream.
Yes.
So with lucid dreaming, is it one or the other, or
Well, this is a good
either or?
question. Anything's possible when you're lucid dreaming, because some people will have a question. You can ask questions when you're lucid dreaming. You can get answers. And so you can say, what does it look like to see myself from above? And then suddenly you're seeing yourself from above. And then you can say, okay, that's weird. I want to be back in me. That feels more normal. So it's gives you the capability, like you're playing a role-playing game on a computer, that you can sort of say, like, I want to experience this, and then that happens. And the feedback, that dialogue that's happening, is the same thing when we're lucid living, that's happening in the form of synchronicity, coincidence, where we're having an ongoing conversation with the cosmos, with that foundational consciousness. And to the degree we do that in waking life, we're living a lucid dream in our daily life. We're seeing reality shifts.
Yeah, and we can go for more positive. I had something happen last week that was just that. I was speaking with somebody, and then all of a sudden I had this thought about collaborating together. And just as I thought it, I mean, it was maybe 1 second, like, I don't even know if I'd quite finished the thought, out of the mouth of this other woman was those exact thoughts that I had just said. She spoke them. So I don't know if that's lucid living or not, but it was
Absolutely.
kind of like wow.
Yeah, absolutely. And you'll find, I think you've noticed probably, that the more in alignment you are, people think of it as authentic. When your head and your heart and your gut are all lined up, then you're going to see a lot more of this sort of thing, because you're just moving all of a piece. You're not disjointed and fragmented. And so you'll get to see that kind of synchronicity happening, and it'll tend to be very positive, both.
Possibilities are very exciting.
Yes.
All right. We have had a lot of fun tonight, and we've gone a little bit over. So for those of you that are on, thank you for sticking with us. So Cynthia's website is realityshifters.com, and you can sign up for her newsletter. She does individual sessions, right?
Yes.
And what else? You can join her Mandela Effect. She has fabulous books on her website that I would highly recommend. And they're, some of them are thicker and some are skinny, but they're digestible. Anyway, it was fun. So I'm seeing lots of thank you.
Oh, thank you.
From people and appreciating that. Yeah, I think it's a lot to sort of, I think we'll all be integrating this. So
Changing the world. Thank you. Thank you to everyone who's participating and listened to the whole thing and watched, because each and every one of us makes a difference. And when we're doing this together, it's huge. It's like we can reach that tipping point where no matter how things may seem in the so-called real world, we can change it. So we're doing it.
Absolutely. And kind of when I'm talking about that, the group, that when I would kind of switch to the group, I saw that our economy and the world economy was switching to a more stable, thing. And there was just a whole collective camaraderie, just a more sense of a well-being and people working together instead of against each other. So,
oh, I love that.
Yeah. Well, I could keep talking, but I'm going to sign us up. So thank you so much, Cynthia. This has been amazing. And I will send the recording out to everybody. So, all right.